Welcome to The Victims and Villains, a podcast extension of the nonprofit dedicated to educating and engaging individuals on mental health awareness through pop culture. We are looking through the lens of ma-raineys-black-bottom for this episode.
I'm your co-host, Captain Nostalgia.
And I am your co-host, Black Nerd Magic. All right, boys, you don't seem the best. Now I'm going to show you the rest. Ma-Rainey's going to show you her black bottom.
Man, so I guess this is the last, I'm pretty sure this is the very last live action we're ever going to see Chadwick Boseman do. And I feel like this episode has been kind of like a long time in the making. We did social media posts about it. We did a Facebook Live. But I feel like kind of given what this movie will probably grow to become in legacy, we should probably start off with kind of just remembering Chadwick Boseman.
Yes, because Chadwick, for his final performance, he gives an incredible performance, and it really makes you sad and just makes you wonder, like, you know, what it would have been great to see Chadwick in his response to all the adulation he's getting this year, not just from this film, but also from The Five Bloods. He was a guy full of charisma, full of talent, full of grace, dedication, and he just knew how to bring happiness to the silver screen, and he also knew how to, be serious when it came to it. And ma-raineys-black-bottom, his last performance, encapsulates what his whole career was made about. And it shows why he was a superstar actor. You know, he finally had his big break 2 years ago with Black Panther. And I feel that with that film, he can now go ahead and start doing more dramatic roles and kind of etching out his range. And this film is a great standout of it. I would honestly say that this probably could be the best career performance he's had. And I know people will probably say Black Panther. Some people will say 42. Some people will say his James Brown biopic film. But it was amazing to see him on the screen. Very surreal. It made me feel like, I'm not sure if you're familiar, but with Aaliyah, you know, the R&B singer who ended up dying in a plane crash in 2001. And I remember seeing Queen of the Dam months after the news and her passing, and it was just so real to see this girl, you know, who I was a big fan of, showcasing why she was so great and talented, and realizing that we're never going to see her again in that capacity. And that's what I feel like with Chadwick. But this film, ma-raineys-black-bottom, acts as a memoriam to him in a way. You know, we see his character go through the ups and downs of being a black person in 1920 Chicago, and the way he plays it is just well done. I mean, he hit no bad marks in this film. All his hits were straight home runs, and he portrays a great character in this trumpet player who he's frustrated because he wants to branch out and have his own sound. He's tired of working for Ma-Rainey and the band, and he wants to be an expressionist. He wants to be more improvisational. He wants to make more dance-centric music instead of just the blues. And when you come to see what happens to his character and the fate that befalls him, it's very tragic. But yes, I mean, Chadwick was amazing in this, and you know, I'm going to miss him from a film critic standpoint and a personal fan.
Yeah, I've never seen a bad performance from Chadwick, and that's something that I feel like I can't say about a lot of performers, especially actors, because I feel like there are movies that just have, you know, every actor is entitled to kind of turn in one performance. Some people take advantage of that grace a little bit too much, but Chadwick never delivers a bad performance. And I feel like, you know, when you're talking about what people are going to call their favorite film, whether it is 42 or Black Panther, you know, both of which are incredible performances. And I still, as of this recording, have not seen The Five Bloods, and it has been on my watch list for a couple months now. And this movie he's so good in this movie. For this movie it's named after Ma-Rainey, and who, as we'll kind of get to explore a little bit later in the episode, is played by Viola Davis. But this movie, there are certain points in this movie where I found myself just being like, this feels like a Chadwick Boseman movie. Like, and it's weird because it kind of has this duality to where it feels like it's honoring the legacy of Ma-Rainey, and it's telling kind of her tale of being mother of the blues, and then kind of like having this deeper surface where it's talking about the the African American experience during the 20s and the following the Great Depression, and what racism was still like in these days. We see it when they walk into the Jewish deli. There's one scene in particular, but you have all of that legacy and the social injustice that's built into that story. Then on the other hand, you really have a fitting tribute to Chadwick Boseman. I mean, there are just so many sequences in this movie where he is just so profoundly powerful. And I would dare to say that, honestly, this movie, it might not crack my top 10 or my top 20 favorite movies of the year, but he definitely cracks this performance right here is within my top 5 favorite performances this year, if not his entire career, because of just how much passion that he brings to this character, and the fact that he actually learned trumpet for this role. I mean, this is a guy that just didn't just want to turn in a mediocre performance. Like, he wanted the audience to really feel the weight of what they were watching, and really make it as real and authentic as possible. And he completely turns that in for as Levi Green, the trumpet player here. Levy, that's it. Sorry. Levy Green, the trumpet player for Ma-Rainey's band. And he was a visionary that I think as a character was ahead of his time, kind of like foreseeing where the way of music was going to end up going away from kind of like the blues into kind of more of this like rock and roll / like swing, kind of like higher tempo quality than what Ma-Rainey was doing.
Yeah, he was definitely inspired by the hot bands that were present in jazz, and I'm pretty sure that his character was a big fan of Louis Armstrong, because Louis Armstrong during that time was like, he was like the messiah in jazz music. I mean, he turned the art form into something more than what it was. I mean, he changed music forever with what he added to the genre. So with Levy, I mean, he kind of wants that legacy. He doesn't just want to be a person who plays for Ma-Rainey, because Ma-Rainey is the star of the show. I mean, she's the diva. She is the superstar, and whatever she says goes. If you're in her band, you're just her band member. She's the draw. So he wants to have that draw. He wants to have that legacy. He wants to have that name recognition, especially because his character comes from a traumatic childhood. And I think the best scene of the film results from that, where he tells the story of how as a child he saw his dad and mom be victimized by white supremacists, and how his dad would smiled in like the face of the man who attacked his wife, sold him his land because they didn't want him there, because he was being too good of a black man. He had his own land and he had his own business, but he was being too uppity. So they destroyed it. And then his father ended up getting revenge on them. It was almost like he was planning on how to get at them. And so he talks about, don't talk to me about how to deal with the white man. I know how to deal with him, So he's a broken guy inside. He comes from pain, and he wears that like a chip on his shoulder. And sadly, it ends up tragically working against him. But you can see that he's inspired to do great things.
Yeah, and I definitely enjoy the way that this movie fleshes out his character as it goes along. And this movie, is going to be one of those movies that, again, to kind of go back to our main discussion, you have to be either a fan of the blues or a cinephile in order to properly enjoy this movie. I don't feel like this movie is going to be for everyone. This movie is very dialogue heavy. It originally was a stage play by August Wilson that was translated marvelously into this movie for Netflix, and the performances are phenomenal. And but I agree. I think that this his characterization of how they end up, kind of like where they end up taking him, is just a fascinatingly beautiful and tragic ending to where I feel like I want to get into this, but I can't do it without spoilers. So we're gonna take a quick commercial break, and we'll be right back after this to talk about ma-raineys-black-bottom. If you or someone you know is listening to this podcast right now and you're struggling with suicide, addiction, self-harm, or depression, we encourage you guys to please reach out. This is the heartbeat of why we do what we do. Suicide is currently the 10th leading cause of death in the United States, and as of this recording, there are 132 suicides that take place each and every day on American soil. And when you scale back internationally, there are 800,000 successful suicides. That is one death roughly every 40 seconds. So if you or someone you know is struggling, you guys can go to victimsandvillains.net/hope. That resource is going to be right in the description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this. There you'll find resources that include the National Suicide Lifeline, which is 1-800-273-8255. You can also text HELP to 741-741. We also have a plethora of other resources, including churches, getting connected with counselors, LGBT resources like the Trevor Project, and also veteran hotline as well. Please, if you hear nothing else in this show, understand that you listening to this right now, have value and worth. We get it. Suicide, depression, mental health, these are hard topics, and the stigma around them doesn't make it any easier. But please consider the resources right in the descriptions below wherever you guys are listening, because once again, you have value and you have worth. So please stay with us. How would you guys like to help us get mental health resources into schools, conventions, and other events? Well, now you can. Simply go to patreon.com/victimsandvillains for as little as $1 a month. You guys can help us get mental health resources into current and upcoming generations, educate and break down stigma surrounding mental health, suicide, and depression. And you get exclusive content that you can't get anywhere else. And you guys can tell us which Nicolas Cage movie you want us to cover, and we'll do it. All it takes to get started is to go to patreon.com/victimsandvillains, or simply click the link in the episode description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this episode. Pick your tier and get started today. Yes, it's that simple. So quickly select the tier that you want and help us get hope into the hands of the depressed and the suicidal today. Welcome back to Victims and Villains, and we are swinging to spoilers for this episode on ma-raineys-black-bottom. So if you guys haven't seen the movie, it's currently streaming exclusively on Netflix, so you guys can check it out over there and then come back in this one. But like I was saying before the commercial break, with Boseman's character in this one, he comes from a very decent background, honestly. Like, his dad had he said like a lot of land. I think he talked about like 50 acres. Like, he was a farmer that could grow any kind of seed that you planted in his ground. Like, he just knew how to really turn a profit. And then one night his parents basically ended up kind of experiencing some racial injustice, and basically his father died. His mother is implied that she got raped and then died, and so she kept crying out for God, and God kind of didn't do anything, and so we see him kind of like really trying to make the best of the situations that life has dealt him. He is very kind of passive in the way that he jokes around about his quote bad luck in this movie. But the more that the movie unravels and the more that you kind of get to see a lot of his backstory, it feels more like this is kind of his movie than Ma-Rainey's. I don't know if you felt like that, but I felt like this movie definitely felt more like his story than hers.
Oh, it definitely did. We see Viola Davis, here and there, but she's not the mainstay of this film, even though she is the main draw of the time that she was in. It feels like that we're mostly seeing this film from Levy's eyes, and I wonder how purposeful that was, or was it just the way that they wanted the story to be told, because it is a stage play, but yes, I feel like we're seeing the black condition in 1920s America through Levy's eyes. We see him, and sometimes he may be brash. He's full of himself. He's very confident, and he doesn't want to fall in with the status quo. And there's something admirable about that. For as much as ma-rainey, she was the mother of the blues, and she was making this great music, and she was ushering in this age of music where, the female voices, they really ring powerful, and they really were the draw when it came to artists in this day. But in Levy's case, it feels like that we're still getting a story that is centered on how hard it is to be black in America. I mean, we see it at the end. Levy, his dreams are dashed because it turns out that he was being exploited by the record label that he thought wanted his music. They want to take his music and pay him for it, but put it in the hands of a white band to play it, to bring it to the mainstream. And this speaks on the exploitation of the music industry we see now. I mean, how many times do we hear about artists having ghostwriters or people who are in the background who would deserve that shot that maybe another artist gets? Or having the integrity of your music being ruined by the record labels who would rather see it in someone who's more marketable, maybe more lighter than you are. And Levy becomes a victim of his own ambition. He thinks that, he's very naive into thinking that these record labels are just willing to sign anybody, especially a black artist during this time, without giving up something. And he had to give up his creativeness, and that's what led him to the brink, because that's all he had. All he had was music. He didn't have anything else. This is what he knew. This is what he'd been building his life to, and for that to dash it from his eyes, it destroys him.
Yeah, and the way that this movie ends, especially with Chadwick and his character, just seeing a white guy trying to interpret this song, that, man, like, what a sourly powerful note to end on. And I turned to my wife, who watched this movie with me, and said that, it's, I don't know, like, what's tragic, the fact that he ended up actually, like, his rage brought him to murder, or the fact that he got conned out of, exploited, like you said is a better word. He got exploited out of his original songs that he was, basing a lot of his, dreams and ambitions on, because that's like his entire running, like, that's what he's running towards the entire time of this movie, is gonna start my own band, gonna get out of this, ma-rainey's shadow, and I'm gonna become my own man. And that those ambitions really kind of become his downfall at the end, because, like you had said, like, he's not a marketable guy. And Netflix has a companion special that was with this movie, where they sit down with the cast and the crew, and they kind of showed like the behind the scenes making of it, and it really enriches the experience of this movie and the history that it's based upon. And so I would definitely say that if you guys haven't checked it out, it's only 30 minutes. It's well worth your time. But the practice that you were just talking about is actually called race records. And basically what these white executives would do is they would see the growth of blues and rock and roll, and specifically music that was targeted and had a demographic of the black population, and they basically would pay them next to nothing to record these songs, and then they would have the artists sign a release form basically relinquishing creative control, and then actually building empires off of that, because they're marketing it to people of all different colors and backgrounds. And because I think there are times where I'll listen to new music, and like I don't know the demographic it's trying to target always. Like there are some that there are some musicians that you can definitely understand the demographic they're trying to release, and then there are others that just kind of have that gray area. And this was a practice that was very much practiced in the music industry, and I think even to this day is still being practiced. Earlier this year, Joe Rogan did an interview with Kanye West and was talking about Kanye was kind of talking about how the music industry was raping him, for lack of a better word, his words, not mine, but just kind of showing that they're still exploiting that, and kind of how that practice is still here to this day. And my wife even turned to me at the end of that, and with the ending of the big jazz band doing Levy's song, and said, I wonder if he even got credit for it.
Oh, he didn't get no credit for that. They're going to pass that off as the white band created it. I mean, the exploitation of Levy, and even to an extent Ma-Rainey, because Ma-Rainey in the film, Viola Davis, who is incredible once again. I mean, Viola Davis can never do it wrong in a film. I know that if she's in a film and she has a role, she's going to bring it to stellar levels. And she's stellar in this, but there's a scene where she talks about how the music industry exploits her. She talks about how the recording studio, they don't want nothing from me but my music. They can call me every name in the book, but once they get that music, then that's when they smile in my face. So they're using me for all I'm worth. They're using all of my labor, all of my hard work, and they can't even give me a bottle of Coca-Cola like I asked for a recording session. And it's akin to slavery. That's what it is. I mean, you have these record labels who are exploiting these artists, just harvesting them, just growing new artists every year and sucking them up, sucking all the energy out of them. And they're making pennies on the dollar, especially in an era where streaming services don't pay that much to these music artists when their songs get played. These record labels are making millions off of that. Mm-hmm. They're getting the fruits of the labor, but the artist is not. And that's why you're seeing these artists who are now coming together and asking these streaming services like Spotify, like Apple Music, like YouTube Music, and telling them, hey, you need to start paying us better rates. My art can't be something that I don't get a pittance out of. I make this art. Yes, I do it for the passion. I do it for the music, but I need to be compensated, especially if you're going to use my art in commercials. You're going to use it in movies. You're going to have it in these special playlists that get a bunch of likes, a bunch of listens to. I need to be compensated. And that's what was happening in this era. It's like slavery. It's like, we're going to use you for all your worth. And when we're done with you, we're going to throw you away. And you'll never have another chance to make it in this industry. It's terrible. And it happens much worse in the era of streaming today.
Yeah, absolutely. And to kind of switch over to a different medium, comic books. That's why when a lot of the artists that were working at Marvel in the late 80s had all these characters and weren't actually seeing the recognition and the royalties that they were owed. They were like, you know what, we're going to leave and we're going to go off and we're going to start Image. And you see how successful Image still is today. Like, Todd McFarlane has created himself an empire, and all to basically retain those rights. And going back to music, I grew up in the music scene, and when I say music scene, I grew up as a hardcore metal kid, and I had some friends that were lucky enough to sign to some labels. And granted, these labels were fairly small. However, I also will say that their labels like just did not take care of them. They exploited them in every way imaginable, and have actually, like, after court battles, have said, we want to stay DIY. We don't want anything to do with the label industry, because these guys, they just don't take care of us. Like, that means that, like, we have to work harder and book for ourselves, or, you know, make our merch. And, you know, we're talking about it, then we'll do it. We're here talking about a movie, and the movie industry is the exact same way. Like, the theaters that show these movies, like, they are fighting tooth and nail to stay open and keep the lights on, because they're not making money because of the way that contracts are written with these studios. Like, those guys, they really thrive on, you know, concession sales and, you know, stuff along those lines. And so, you know, I think that the exploitative system that we see here in place is specifically in the concept, the history of race records and, you know, blacks being exploited in the music scene by white producers, has manifested into many different forms and is still a mainstay in Hollywood today because of it.
And the other thing that, you know, this exploitation does is that it sacrifices the art. You know, it makes these artists have to hit these benchmarks in order to get a record release. Like, these record labels will tell you, hey, well, I mean, I know you want to talk about some substantial stuff on this album, but hey, we were hoping that you could make that dance track that hit #1 a few years ago. We were hoping you could make more of those, you know, because that's what's going to get us on the charts. That's what's going to get us, like, you know, award nominations, not this real stuff that you want to talk about. So the quality of the music suffers. I mean, think of how many artists today make just a bunch of garbage in music. Like, they make the same album over and over again, not willing to evolve or be creative. This is why I respect artists, you know, like a Kendrick Lamar, or like somebody like, rest in peace to Mac Miller. You know, somebody who was not willing to stay in one station of music. Someone who's willing to explore, go do different topics, make music that even their fans may not be attributed to, but something that is evolving according to how they are in life. So much music today is the same thing you'll hear over and over again. I mean, like, I hate to put them on the spot, but you know what? I'm going to do it, because this band is the full example of what I'm talking about with suffering art in music. Imagine Dragons, the band, you know, Radioactive, you know, Thunder and the Lightning. Yeah, them. They are the sweet commercial band that mainstream music wants to see these days. A band that does nothing but make jingles that can be used in car commercials or movie trailers. That's all they're good for. Their music has no substantial value. You know why? Because I'm pretty sure the record labels is telling them, hey, you know that song Radioactive? Keep making that song every time you do an album. Keep making those type of songs. I'm pretty sure they might want to make different music, but they probably can't, because they're in a contract with a label. And the label's paying for the studio time, and they're paying for these tours, and they're giving them all this resources and everything. So once you become a person who's working for the label, your art is going to suffer. You're not going to feel inspired to make music. And that's why you see a lot of these artists who come out on Instagram or Twitter who go against their record label, tell them, I've been depressed because I can't make the music that I want to make because the labels won't even release my album. That's what's going on today. And ma-raineys-black-bottom is just another example of showing that. And it does that more better, I think, than anything else in the film.
Yeah, and there's a scene in the beginning of the movie where the band is first getting there, and so you have Toledo, Slow Drag, and I can't remember the guy's name. Oh, who is the trombone player?
Um,
It started with
Trombone
a
player.
C. It started with a C. We see that factor explored here too, where you can kind of see the difference in ideology. So when Cutler, Slow Drag, and Toledo first get there, they're setting up in the basement, and Chadwick's character is a little bit slower to kind of get down there, and he basically he gets down there, and they're, for the rest of the band outside of Levy, they're basically talking about like how it's just another paycheck to them. And Chadwick says something to the effect of, I'm talking about art. And I think even sometimes, like, we as a general population, like, kind of forget that at the end of the day, that cinema, music, comics, books, video games, all of these things that we consume so much of our time in, that they are in art, that they are, for good or for bad, that is a filmmaker, a artist, an inker, a letterer, a video game designer, computer graphics, just a number, a musician, like that is them filling out their art form. And you talk about evolution in music. One of the bands that I have listened to for years have kind of gone through these journeys of becoming like very, very, like, they went from like being like a very heavy band to kind of being now more like a melodic band. But they've gone through these like evolutions, and it's like, I respect that, because like each album that they're putting out is reflecting where that artist is as a creative entity in that season of life. And I think sometimes we kind of get so involved in the idea of consumerism that we actually forget about the art craft, or the craft of the arts that's actually at the center of all of these mediums.
Yeah, well, think about it, Josh, it's like, think about the country we live in and how much capitalism is like celebrated in this country. I mean, it go ahead, Josh.
It makes me so sad because we're the last episode we did together was Mank, and Mank is such a visually stunning and sounding movie, but at the end of the day, it is a movie for cinephiles. It is for a movie for people that enjoy the medium of cinema. It is an art. And that's kind of how I feel about Ma-Rainey's, is it's because of how dialogue heavy it is, and uneventful, some might argue that it is as well. It's art. And I think you're going to have people that are, that walk away and be like, this was a waste of time for me. And you know what? That's okay. Like, granted, at the end of the day, personally, it kind of breaks my heart that pieces of cinema get overlooked because of this. Because, of just our, I won't say like attention spans, but like just because of like how much we feel entitled to these like big blockbusters. I think in some ways, like the blockbuster background of Hollywood is kind of like uprooted our appreciation for fine cinema.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it's all about, what a person does to create something original. Like, I mean, people just don't understand how hard it is to create something new these days, because everything is a copycat of each other. I mean, we become a society that's more wanting the same thing instead of something different. I feel that we used to be a country that would love things different. Like, remember in the 1990s when there was such a variety of different films that you could watch. There was hardly any sequels. There were a few franchises, but there was a lot of original movies that came across there that changed the medium, and like independent cinema had blossomed, and we understood and appreciated the new then. But now that Hollywood has become more corporate, even than it was before. Now it's all about box office numbers. Now it's all about, well, if this movie can't get more than 20 million its first weekend, then we're not gonna greenlight it. And this is what frustrates filmmakers like Dennis Villanueva. I think that's how you say his name. When his Dune movie that was supposed to come out this year, but because of COVID it didn't. He doesn't care about the box office. He cares about making cinema. He cares about making films, making stories that visually translate to something different than just something on the surface level. But those kind of films don't get the big numbers. So you know what? A lot of people are already saying, "Oh, it's going to be a flop." But I don't think he was making it for it to be a box office hit. I think he was making it because he wanted to create a story. And that's what we lost in this day and age. People who are willing just to create stories, create something memorable, create something long lasting, instead of something that is here to make money and then boom, is gone, and then you're moving on to the next thing. And Ma-Rainey is a person who in this film, she doesn't care about getting a new audience. She understands and appreciates the people who have been following her since day one. Like, she understands, like, hey, I want to make the music that feels good to me. I don't want to have somebody who's coming and telling me what kind of music I should make. I want to make something that feels in my soul good to me. And that's what we've lost in this day and age.
Yeah, and I feel like that's one of the reasons I love exploring like independent cinema, is because you don't have those limitations of studios getting involved and saying, no, this needs to be cut because of production. It's like, well, I'm going to bring my full vision to the table that I think that, if it's weird, cool. If it's not, awesome. And there are movies that I feel like kind of fly under the radar and kind of aren't liked by general populations because of kind of like how complex they can be. And one of the things that you brought up, Dennis Vanilla, that's not even close. But man, like, I was so impressed with Blade Runner 2049 and instantly fell in love with that guy. And he was also the guy that did Prisoners too, right?
Yes, Prisoners is amazing as well.
And Prisoners is like one of this movie that has like a top tier cast, but it flies under the radar because of its subject matter and its complexity. And I think at the end of the day, like, we're kind of getting into this niche of not just franchises, but like wanting something to be like simplistic. And simplistic is okay if it's done right. Like Scare Me, that is now streaming on Shudder. Very simple movie, very effective movie, hilarious movie. And again, that is just the example of how simplicity can work. Host is another great movie that came out this year that just explores the limitations of, being able to explore simplicity through limitations and that being okay. And I think that that's one of the things that I really loved here about this movie, is that it's so simple, but it's like so effective at the end of the day. And I will say that, like, from a white point of view, not really knowing a whole lot about Ma-Rainey or the history that this movie explores, I enjoyed that this movie is simple enough to just be a blues recording session, but also be incredibly layered in depth with its social injustice and its, desire to really showcase the Black experience and how tightly wound and intimate it was with the growing history of the blues.
Yes, this film just took me back to jazz class in my first year of college. Because beforehand, I really hadn't found appreciation at my time in my life for jazz music, but I took a jazz class and I learned about, the people like ma-rainey, Louis Armstrong, Dizzy Gillespie, Bessie Smith, all these people who helped contribute to the great American art form that is jazz. Jazz, which has influenced every musical genre from its inception, even including rock, country, hip hop, pop. I mean, jazz has its fingerprints in everything. Um, I love that this film is going to open up avenues for people to go deeper into that history. Honestly, I'm thinking now that I should start downloading some new jazz music onto my Spotify now. Because seeing this film is like, hey, I remember this artist, and then look at this new artist. Like it's bringing me back to that time, and I love that it does that because the music is really good in this film as well.
This music is incredible, not just what we hear through ma-rainey's band, but also some of the orchestrations and the actual score. Yeah, so the guy's name was
Brantford. Yeah, Brantford Marcellus. He's really good guy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and he kind of like almost like it echoes kind of like this almost modern day like jazz sound to where it kind of reminded me of like soundtracks that I've heard before with like Birdman or Whiplash. And I really enjoyed kind of that modern day fusion with the classic foundational blues that ma-rainey's band has. And just FYI, as soon as I got done this movie and the Netflix special, I made lunch to ma-rainey music from Spotify. So thank you for that, Spotify.
Hey, it's nice. That is nice right there. I like that.
So she's on my list of things definitely to jump into throughout the course of this week. And I feel like this movie, the soundtrack alone, along with some of the performances, definitely deserve Oscar to be introduced into the Oscar nominations.
Yeah, I would say for me that Chadwick is definitely a guy who should be in the best supporting actor debate, and I think Viola should get some. She should get some fringe best actress nods as well, even though she's not really as much in the film as I thought she was going to be. I mean, I think that her scenes are played very well. I mean, she plays a bold and bona fide black woman in a time where in America, if a black person didn't get off the sidewalk to let a white person walk past them, then they would have been lynched. So to have somebody like ma-rainey, who was unafraid, who was bashful, who was the person who knew her value and walked around it with the knowledge of that was something revolutionary for Black America during that time, and she has to be one of the first like black musical superstars, especially in the female department. I mean, she was a rock star of her time, and she lived larger than life, and it showed in this film.
Yeah, absolutely. Viola Davis just commands the screen. For as little as she's on the screen in this movie, she just commands it. And that's one of the things that I'm so driven and falling in love with this movie is because of just how impactful she is. And that's why the persona and the actual story behind this film of ma-rainey really captivates me. And I really can't wait to dig more into it because I basically watched this movie this morning and then jumped on the call with you. So I did not get a whole lot of time to get to explore her history a little bit more. But I just love the way that she is such a strong figure in a time where women really weren't as respected as they were in culture, and even further, the black women respected in this culture, and she just is a incredible force of historical significance that deserves attention. And one of the things that I think that they do really well, she has a monologue where she's talking to Cutler, and she's kind of explaining like her woes, and she's explaining about how like her manager, who's a white guy, like, they're always talking about how they want the best for me, and I've only ever been to his house one time in 6 years, and it was to perform for some of his white friends. And you can definitely see the echoing of that race records thing we were just talking about a few moments ago, echoing throughout their relationship, and the hostility that is the kind of unspoken hostility between Ma and her manager. And she says a line that says that it just kind of broke my heart, and it's the very last line in this monologue, and then it fades into another scene and says, "Well, call me everything but a child of God." And I felt like that just kind of like summed up the experience so well of what men and women of color went through during that time.
Yeah, I wanted to bring up an interesting symbolic moment in this film that I think might have escaped a lot of people's eyes. So just follow me real quick right here. So there's a scene where Levi is talking about, he's talking about his memories of seeing his mother attacked and how he was cut when he was trying to defend his mother. And he's talking about how he tried to go to a hospital to get immediate care. He was turned away at this hospital because the white doctor said that he was helping a calf be born. And so a calf's life was more important than him potentially losing his life. And I feel it has echoes to Bessie Smith. There is a scene where Ma-Rainey brings up Bessie Smith. She's like, I don't care if Bessie Smith sells 1 million records. She's not doing anything except for what I taught her to do. I was her mentor, And Bessie Smith was a famous blues singer, maybe even more of a superstar than what Ma-Rainey was during this time in the 20s. And Bessie Smith ended up dying due to a car accident in late 1928, 29. But the reason and the circumstances surrounding her death were very tragic. She was in a car accident on the highway. The nearest hospital was a hospital that was designated only for whites only. So she went to this hospital. She needed immediate help because she had just been in a car accident, and the doctors turned her away because of the color of her skin. Bessie Smith, famous jazz singer, one of the most famous women in the entertainment business during that time, was turned away because of her skin of her color. And the black hospital that they told her to go to was about 10 or 15 miles away, and she ended up dying on the way there. And so I felt that when Levi was talking about that experience of being turned away, how black people were turned away from getting even medical care, in this era, and having to go to substandard hospitals and potentially dying because their life didn't mean more than others, is a very sad occurrence that I think still resonates today, because a lot of people in the African American community are skeptical of any medical care that they get from the establishment.
So one of the things that the director talked about on the special was actually another scene of symbology that and kind of goes along with what you're talking about. And throughout the entire course of this movie, Levy has two things that is three things. He wants to make it with Ma Rainey's girl. He wants to record his music. And he wants to know what's behind this door. And so there's several shots throughout the movie where he's constantly trying to open up this door. And then it comes to a point in the film where he gets fired from Ma Rainey's band, and what he does is he kind of has this meltdown in the basement where they're in their practice space, and so he goes to that door and he takes out all that anger on that door and finally gets it open. And the director was talking about how that particular scene, because once he gets it open, it is basically a almost kind of like walking into a chimney where it's three just brick walls, and it's that scale up the entire side of the building, and it kind of might have been like a smoking area. But he had said that, you know, it was a allegory, or it was a metaphor for racism, where, you know, you are promised equality, you're promised that something's going to get better, and you keep pressing up against this door to test those theories and to see if they're genuine. And then once you kind of get on the other side of it, it leads to nowhere.
I like to thank you for giving us that aside right there, because I had a feeling that that door that was in the film meant something, because they kept bringing it up. You know, Levi's talking about, like, hey, like, why is this door? This door wasn't here beforehand. He keeps trying to, like, to break it and get to it or get close to it, and he eventually breaks there, and it's like there's like nothing there. You know, there's a view, but the view feels limiting. It feels like he's in like a prison of somewhat. You know, once that if the door closes behind him. Yeah, it's a very powerful analogy. Like, this is the one thing that I do cite the film for, is for being able to bring about commentary but not make it feel preachy. Nothing feels preachy in this film. It feels very organic, and it feels like there was a lot of thought that went into how they were going to explore these themes and stories.
Yeah, it's very subtle in the way that it does a lot of these thematic elements. Like, we really haven't even touched on this yet, but this film has a lot of humor, and I honestly wasn't expecting to laugh as much as I was expecting to laugh in this movie. But it's just it's the way that they kind of like deliver some of these jokes and some of the camaraderie moments, where it is able to really kind of be this film that on the surface looks like a blues session with a couple of laughs, and, you know, you really get the feel of what it was like to kind of work in a creative space in that outlet. And being someone that used to do music, I've been in sessions like that. Like, I know what it's like to write and, you know, try to, like, you know, get everyone on the same page, and like the frustrations that can come along with that. And so, but then you kind of get into it a little bit deeper, and it has these these sides of, you know, racism, and another great, but it's like you said, like, it's never too preachy. And another scene that I feel like really qualifies for conversation is this aside that Toledo has, and Toledo's like playing this song on the piano, and he's talking about kind of almost describing the experience of the black man in this day as being kind of a second thought to humanity, and considering them to be like leftovers was the word that he used. And the way that it's shot in particular, you're kind of going into, you know, what could kind of almost be like these lower income modern day areas, and you're just kind of showing people on their porches, and you're just kind of seeing, like, when we're talking specifically in today's you know, conversations about stuff like, you know, gentrification and redlining, those are terms that when we think of those are kind of like Section 8, like lower income housings that we have a tendency mostly to think about. And that scene is just edited and spliced together really well to kind of sum up that experience, and it's very subtle in the way that it's delivered.
Yes, I agree with all of that. I do say that it being a stage play, I didn't really find any of the direction very dynamic in a sense. I want to say that this film really wins on the performances, on Chadwick, on Viola, on the supporting actors, and the music. But I feel that outside of it, it's very, very kind of like plain. Not saying in a bad way, but it doesn't really do anything to step outside of the boundaries as far as this technical direction is concerned.
I'm so glad that you said that, because I kind of had the same experience with this movie, to where like I was really wowed by the performances and some of the subtext that George C. Wolfe, the director, is saying, and kind of how he has these asides with Toledo and the door, and Levi's backstory and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, like, this movie just is, there's nothing really like I said, like, dynamic about it. It just kind of feels like, I don't know, like, even like what movie to kind of compare it to, but it just doesn't feel like it's as dynamic or like special as it could be, especially given the fact that this is Chadwick's final live action performance.
Yeah, and I can understand, like, it's a stage play, so you kind of have to film it that way in a stage play. There's kind of some limitations that you have to agree with before you watch them. But I mean, I've seen films like One Night in Miami this year, or like Fences with Denzel and Viola a few years ago, where they were stage plays, but they felt dynamic. They felt a lot more like worldly. But this felt a little bit kind of closed in, and like even the outside aspects of Chicago felt a little bit kind of like too glossy for me. Like, it felt that it was like more of something that would be like in The Great Gatsby, and not really a depiction of what 1920 Chicago looked like. And it's like authentic. I'm trying to say the word authenticness. That's what I'm trying to say. Authenticness. But yeah, I mean, I would say that going into this film, I expected a lot more, but I think I was still pleased with what I got, and I was just pleased to see that Chadwick went out on a very, very high note.
Agreed. Yeah, some of his monologues in this movie, it just kind of brought me to the brink of tears. The him and Cutler, when he pulls out the knife and he's like challenging God, and he's like, you turn your back on me, like come and save him. Like, that is just such a powerful sequence. And then the other sequence where he's show, like you had previously said, like showcasing like how he got the cut, is another like profound scene. And I kind of want to play devil's advocate here a little bit. I will agree with you that there's nothing terribly remarkable about this movie. However, the way that the camera work, and the way that it's blocked and shot, and the fluidity of the camera in the scene where Cutler and the band are trying to break up Levy, and like it flows like in and out of the practice space. One of the best shot films or sequences in this movie.
Yes, I really love those too. Like, especially when the scene where they're trying to get through the takes of Black Bottom, where ma-rainey has her nephew Sylvester trying to read it off because he has a little bit of a stuttering problem. I really liked that. I mean, I thought that was a nice little like comic relief kind of moment. Especially seeing the tension between Levy and Ma reach an all-time high during these studio sessions. There's a little bit of like suspense, not really suspense in the way that you think that something bad is going to happen, which it does, but it's very shocking. But it's just that, how is this going to resolve itself? Like, someone's going to have to leave from this band. Someone's going to have to hit the road. And I'm pretty sure it's not going to be Ma. So it's like Levy's almost fighting this unwinnable battle because, I mean, he's an employee of the band, Mm-hmm. And Ma is like, hey, it's like, there is no such thing as like, this isn't a hot band. This is an accompaniment band. So you have to play what I'm telling you to play. If you don't like it, then hey, I could find me another trumpet anywhere. Because think about it, during this time in jazz, everybody was trying to be a part of this art form. So ma-rainey could have fired Levy and just found another trumpet within, like, just down the street from the recording studio, especially in Chicago. So while Levy feels like he has like this independence, it's all for naught. And it kind of culminates in the end where he lets his emotions get the best of him, his trauma, that chip on the shoulder, that brashness, his his disappointment, he lets it get the best of him. He ends up killing one of the people in the band named Toledo, played by Glenn Thurman. He ends up killing him, and it's a very shocking moment. I remember I was looking at the screen. I was like, "What?" I did not expect for the film to even end like this, and it's tragic. And it's tragic in the sense not just because an innocent person died, but because Levy, he ended up destroying himself. He found a battle that he ended up losing. He could not win, and in his moment of desperation and sadness, he makes an irrational decision that costs him his whole life. Now, those dreams of being a jazz performer and having his own band and touring across the country, those days are over. Now he's just another African American criminal, as they would like to call it, but he was more than that. And that film shows it beautifully, but it also shows what the disease of racism and exploitation will do to a person.
Yeah, and that's one of the most compelling aspects of Levy's character is how passionate about music he seems on the surface, and how confident he is in his talent, for one, but also too that he's this very complex and very layered character that has had this string of bad luck. And when something good comes in, he wants to do everything he can to preserve that. And him losing not only the Ma-Rainey gig, but also being exploited, lied to, and then having the carpet ripped out from underneath of him with the contract of the recording studio as well. Like, he is just a guy that just again, because of the circumstances of racism and people's prejudice, like, just kind of continuously goes through these terrible cycles, and he falls into that pattern of his anger getting the best of him, and his tragedy and his tragic downfall. Especially the aerial shot where he's just holding Toledo's body as it moves up, is one of the best shots in the movie. But it's also, like you had said, like it's a tragic ending to an otherwise, just very charismatic character.
Yeah, and to be honest, I mean, that scene is very, very tragic. But I think the biggest tragedy is that, we just talked about it before, is that the ending where the white band gets his songs and they don't play him with the style or the groove or the vibe that he wanted. And so now he's not just a stereotypical criminal, as he would be labeled by the Great Society. He's also a guy that sees his dream being achieved by someone else. That band got to achieve and see the song come to fruition. They're going to enjoy the fruits of that. They're going to be able to tour with that song, but they didn't create it. He created that. That was his blood, sweat, and tears. And now he has to experience that while in a jail cell for the rest of his life. But he also has to sit there with that regret. I'm pretty sure if he could go back and do it again, he would not have killed Toledo. He probably could have been like, you know what? Okay, they took my songs, but hey, I'm going to go make new songs. I'm going to continue to figure this out. I'm going to find a new band where they'll allow somebody like me to play. Because there were bands who would have loved to have somebody like Levy. Someone who could improvise, someone who's like making songs for people to dance to. That's the next few years after this 1920 Chicago was the big band era. Levy would have been a great addition. He would have been a great traveling musician for that era. But now he is nothing,
Yeah, there was a documentary that was released earlier this year, and if you can hunt it down and find it, it's one of the best I've seen this year. It's called It All Begins with a Song. And it's basically the experience of Nashville songwriters and the challenge that they undergo to sell themselves as artists, and how hard it is to really make a name for yourself in the music industry in modern age. And Levy has a great deal of talent. I mean, how we get introduced to him is he basically steps over to ma-rainey and, tries to place himself in the spotlight during one of her shows. And then, we just kind of get to explore how talented and how confident he is in his music. And, it makes it more tragic that, I think you might know more than I would, but like there are still a great deal of people that are going through the experiences of not being validated in their art form simply because of the color of their skin. And earlier today, Celeste and I were reminiscing on some of the episodes we had done this year, and one of my favorites that we have done this year was Straight Outta Compton, and NWA as a band really shook up what rap was and what it could have been. And they were just like the movie says, if you could decide on a label like that, what would you call it? Ruthless. And that's such a great way of putting it. Like they were just unapologetic and were just honest in their experience. And I feel like in terms of this movie, like there are still people that experience this on a daily basis and get turned away from stuff because they don't meet the standard of beauty, or they don't meet the standard of the quote unquote sound that producers are looking for. And that's just a nice way of saying we don't want you because of your skin tone.
Yeah, it's still a fight, still a movement that needs to be made to have more diverse voices to be promoted and celebrated into the mainstream. Where we're talking about cinema, where we're talking about music, where we're talking about books, where we're talking about, I mean, even things like, sports managers. There's not a lot of like African American general managers, in football and basketball. And I feel that this movie, whether purposely or accidentally, it really promotes the adage that, hey, Black lives do matter and Black creativeness matters, and there is a space for Black creatives to thrive and to be able to bring something different to the pop culture zeitgeist. And it needs to be more valued. Because, I mean, these people were in the 1920s and they were fighting for validation, and we're still fighting for that same validation. So, yeah, I mean, I would say, hey, check this film out. It's on Netflix right now. I know for the people out there who are fans of Chadwick, it's going to be a tough watch. I was almost close to tears a couple of times myself, but it's a celebration. It is a worthwhile tribute to a wonderful human being. And Viola's amazing in it, and I'm pretty sure a lot of people are going to be fans of it more than haters.
Yeah, and I think this kind of goes without saying, but we're dedicated to introducing and injecting the conversation of mental health into just about everything we do. And a lot of the themes that we've talked about in this episode, whether it is racism or an artist trying to be respected as an artist, or certain genres of music being considered as art forms, like all of those take precedence on your mental health. And one of the things that the documentary talks about Ma-Rainey, that I feel like it just kind of is a perfect way to kind of really bookend this way of what we're talking about, is at the end of the day, for as big as ma-rainey was, she was still fighting for her worth. And I think that that's unfortunately something that, and maybe we can get into this if you want to, but August Wilson, who was the playwright behind this, almost all of his stuff was trying to authentically capture the African American experience and struggle, and showcase that at the end of the day, there are still people in the African American community that are striving for to showcase their worth. And I think this film captures that to a authentic T, passionately and aggressively. And like we had said earlier, like it never really feels like it's over preaching, but it's layered and to this film's identity with ease.
Yes, I agree with everything you said. I would say for anybody who is not familiar with August Wilson, I would say get very familiar. His stage plays they're widely acclaimed for a good reason, and this is just one of them. I mean, I would also check out Fences, from 2016 with Denzel Washington, Viola Davis. That's another great adaptation of August Wilson play.
Yep. And so I think that's going to do it for us on this episode of Victims and Villains. But where can people find the adventures of Black Nerd Magic online?
All right. You can find me on Instagram, Twitter, and you can also find me on letterboxd.com under the name Black Nerd Magic. You can find me on Facebook. My name is Caless Davis, Caless, last name Davis. And also check out the good work that me and Josh have done before in past podcasts. And so I've done some reviews for Victims and Villains, and also check out feelingfilm.com, our friends from over here in the Pacific Northwest.
I love Feeling Film. It's a truly a great podcast. Not only from a cinephile's point of view, but just knowing that film does raise a emotional response, and whether that's for good or for bad. So definitely, if you guys want to kind of deepen your love of cinema, definitely recommend checking out Feelin' Film, and their offshoot Feelin' Film presents the Black Label podcast, which Caless is a brilliant part of. It has definitely taught me a lot this year listening to those episodes, and I'm so grateful for that. So thank you to Feelin' Film and all the creators that made that possible. I'm also on Letterboxd at Captain Nostalgia, but you guys can find us everywhere: Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Twitch, and Letterboxd as well. Or go to victimsandvillains.net, where you guys can get all of the information, all the links to those social medias, our past episodes, movie reviews from Caless, myself, and a ocean of talented writers as well, and most importantly, suicide prevention resources. So that's going to do it for us on this episode. So 1, 2, you know what to do. Subscribe.